Okay, so my name is Kate Jackson, and I'm doing a presentation tonight on the Black history of Hopewell. So we're just gonna go. ah, Here we go. Okay, so first of all, I just kind of wanted to give a little more background. So like Anita was saying, I am a lifelong resident of Hopewell Borough. I grew up just right over on South Landing and went to elementary school right down the road. My fourth grade teacher is over there in the audience tonight. Um, and I just wanted to highlight that I had such an amazing time growing up here. There's just so much history around, and that's always been a great family value for me. You'll see, I'm sure that many others, I hope many others also were forced to attend the Washington crossing the Delaware on Christmas Day. I'm pretty sure that's something that everyone's dads made them go do, I think, right? I hope. So history has always been just a really important part of my life, especially growing up in this area. And when I got to Rutgers and decided that I wanted to study history, I ended up taking a class with the amazing Dr. Leslie Alexander. And we took a class, we had a class about studying Black history through film. And through that, all of my classmates and I really began to reflect on what we had learned and what we hadn't in school. And as I began to kind of think more and more about that, I don't know, things get lost in the tumble of high school. And I actually remembered back in TMS at Timberlane Middle School, a presentation where Elaine Buck and Bev Mills came in to speak about their research, which I think at that point was like pretty recent, their first book. And I think that John Buck was there as well, speaking about his ancestor. And I don't know, this memory kind of just came out and really stood out to me, and something that I really hadn't learned outside of that experience. I think that they also did something for those fake like days we would have snow days, and I remember another version of that as well. But it was really this research that kind of sparked in me that there was so much about this story that I hadn't known and that I felt really compelled to learn more about. So I kind of picked that thread up. I've been committed to a public history approach, which is, you know, doing things like this and getting involved in the community and having a community approach to history as well. It's really important to me not to just come in as like an outsider, but it's just to be embedded in the community as much as possible. Um, so I just wanted to go briefly over what work I've done, just like the experiences that I've had working in like the historical fields. So again, as previously mentioned, I interned with the Hopewell Valley Historical Society this past summer to complete my public history internship for Rutgers. I've continued this through this past fall and, you know, even now to do my capstone work. And this has largely been working with the census material from 1830 to 1850 to create a searchable database of the Black residents of Hopewell, encompassing like all of the data that is given in the census. So to try and fill in this period before 1830 when the census was not available, it wasn't really in existence, I've been looking at tax ratables and manumission records, as well as some other like indexes and wills, so other archival materials to try and supplement this era before the census. And I've also been doing some work with data visualization, which we'll get into and hopefully be able to look through a bit and interact with. And last year, all the way through the beginning of this year, I worked with the Scarlet and Black Research Center, which is Rutgers's wing that's focusing on investigating their relationship with enslavement, as well as Black history in general. So for them, I worked on the NJ slavery records, and I specifically worked with a couple other students on runaway ads that detailed, well, a bunch of newspaper advertisements essentially of the 18th and 19th centuries that detailed both freedom-seeking events as well as sale ads and pickup notices from jails that would list enslaved folks who had been recaptured. So tonight, I hope to kind of just give you a quick run through you know, some of the research that I've done. Obviously, it's pretty difficult to summarize 2 years of work at this point into an hour, but I'm going to do my best. So before I get into any of my research, I just wanted to first give some historical context. I know that most of us are Hopewell Borough residents or Hopewell Township residents, Pennington, everyone. But I still just wanted to give a quick overview of everything, as much as needed. So Hopewell Valley was settled originally by white colonists in the late 17th century and like the early 18th century. So I think the first recorded settlers in Hopewell, what's now Hopewell Borough, were around 1698. So that just kind of is giving us a starting point on that. Hopewell Borough, as we now know it, was not didn't really come into existence until 1825. Previous to that, it was known as it was known by its most primary landmark, which was the Old School Baptist Meeting House, and that was built in 1747 originally. So when we read documents or look through other archival materials, you'll see sometimes it's referred to by the Old School Meeting House. And then just like the rest of New Jersey, which is like the crossroads of the revolution, as we call it, Hopewell Valley was no different. What's now Hopewell Borough and Pennington Borough, were raided by the British Army in 1776. Hopewell Borough specifically was targeted because of the presence of John Hart, the signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was like a known rebel, also an enslaver. No one really wants to bring that up, but he fled to the Sauerland Mountains, like believedly, and was able to evade capture, but died from complications there. Not there, but died later from complications. And then I just wanted to touch back on Pennington Borough specifically, settled technically a little bit later, 1708, I think is the date when they first had settlers in what's now Pennington Borough. Again, originally it was known as Queenstown for Queen Anne. Not that that detail is very important, but and then so after the Revolutionary War, there was a bit of an expansion in Hopewell, in the number of people that were moving here. That's not to overstate it at all. What's now Hopewell Borough still only had 9 properties by 1800, so it was still a very small area. And then we really didn't see a big boom in expansion until the railroads came in. So that's the 1870s. This was like a very distinct period of like the golden age of Hopewell, almost in bringing in a lot of industries, a lot more new people, and a lot more opportunities for folks. So just some general New Jersey Black history that I wanted to provide. So in 1804, New Jersey instituted gradual emancipation, which was a pretty standard practice amongst northern states. And essentially what in New Jersey, the way this specifically worked was that all Black folks that were enslaved, that were born after July, or born on or after July 4th, 1804, were to be freed after. For women, it was 21 years of service. For men, it was 23 years of service, and then they would be freed. And something that we saw happen a lot, not specifically in Hopewell Valley, up in Essex County actually, was that many enslavers would falsify birth records to have it say July 3rd, even if they were born after that, so that people would be enslaved for life. And again, this just gradual emancipation allowed the system of enslavement to persist in New Jersey for way longer than it obviously if immediate emancipation was instituted. And New Jersey was also the last state to ratify the 13th Amendment, which is something that I don't know that I ever learned that in school, or that it was ever really highlighted to me or made very clear that that was super important. But it was not until 1866 that New Jersey actually ratified the 13th Amendment. And the reality of that was that on Juneteenth, which is June 19th, 1865, the day that we celebrate as when the last enslaved folks in Texas learned about the Emancipation Proclamation, there were still approximately 14 enslaved people living in New Jersey, which I think is a really stirring fact. At that point, there weren't any enslaved folks living in Hopewell Valley, but it's just still really telling that that happened here, and that we don't really, but it's not something we talk about. So that's it for the overview, and I'm going to go on to my first piece of archival information that we're looking at tonight is a tax rateable. Very thrilling. So, so from sorry. For the people on Zoom, I just hit the wrong button. Okay, so from 1778 to 1802, we have a series of tax ratables that highlight several settlers in Hopewell Valley with their different assets, essentially. And enslaved folks were obviously, as we all hopefully understand, were incredibly dehumanized by white folks in this area and across the country. So you can see in the top corner here where I've boxed out in red that says slaves. So essentially that what was factored into this calculation of how much people would pay in taxes was how many enslaved people someone owned. So you can see the names that are listed here. You can also obviously tell, since there's only like numbers that are listed, it's I can't give you a cumulative number of how many enslaved folks were here during this period. Each from 1778, like individually, there are usually around 30 to 45 enslaved folks living here at this time. And there were 101 different enslavers at this period as well. So this is an excerpt from the tax rateable of July 1785. I just wanted you to be able to recognize just how enslaved folks are treated in the records. And when you're a historian or just like a researcher in these areas or in areas focusing on the histories of marginalized groups and folks, you have to kind of be able to creatively read into the records that you have. Obviously, they did not write this tax rateable for us to be sitting here in 2025 to think, oh, this is telling us at least how many enslaved folks there were in Hopewell Valley. But that's how we're able to use it today. So we're just moving on to the next slide here to see how you can use manumissions to connect to tax ratables, how you can use multiple archival documents in conjunction with each other to build more of a story. So this is the story of Peter, who was enslaved in Hopewell Valley. This is an excerpt from the 1802 census, or tax rateable, my apologies. So you can see that Jesse Moore, it's highlighted in the red again. It's not super clear, but again, that's, take that up with the state archives. This is Jesse Moore, and he in 1802 recorded that he had one enslaved person living on his property at this time. And this document to your right is a manumission document. This is the first one we're looking at tonight. We'll look at one more. These are really formulaic documents. We'll see that in a lot of them as well with the runaway advertisements too. The way that these work is essentially an enslaver would have to go to the justice of the peace as well as like the overseer of the poor, essentially, to have their enslaved person, in this case Peter, be evaluated to confirm that they wouldn't be a drain on the like government, essentially, and that they would be able to support themselves and not cause issues, essentially. So you can go through, these are all these documents are available through the New Jersey State Archives if you're looking to get more into that. But you can see here that Peter is named in this document somewhere in the middle there. He's talking about that his slave named Peter was examined and successfully can now be emancipated. So yeah, manumission documents are the official way where enslavers could free enslaved people. And then you'll see the signatures from the overseer of the poor and then the justice of the peace as well at the bottom there. And it may seem like a really small detail, but the fact that we know this person's name is just really important and something that otherwise and previously we weren't able to do. And again, maybe it seems like such a small detail to just know that this man's name was Peter, but it's such a huge win in a history, in a area where we previously didn't really know much at all. Okay, so this is the story of Prime, and we're looking here at a tax rateable, at a runaway advertisement, and a manumission certificate. And also, just for those who know the area, this house is actually located on Cherry Valley Road, so just up the hill, and then it's technically now in Princeton Township, but at this time it would have been considered part of Hopewell Valley. So we have those records, and the stone structure that you see would have been original in there during the time of Prime, which I think is just another like really interesting way that we can imagine the lives of these people and put ourselves almost in their shoes a bit more. So you can see in this 1802 tax rateable, which is actually from September of 1802, that Edmund Burroughs records that he has one enslaved person living on his property. And that same month that this tax rateable is done, he puts out a runaway advertisement detailing that Prime had run away from his property. And the term that we use is freedom seeking. This is something that we've used to return agency back to the enslaved folks. That's why it's like terminology is so important in returning agency and power. Even though it might seem minor, that's just another way that we can return authority and power back to these folks. So on the 5th of September, Prime ran away. You can read through these. Again, like I'm saying, it gives a lot of details about the physical appearance. And like I was saying about the tax ratables, we don't, like, they're not giving you this information because they want us to be able to sit here and think, oh, well, it's great that we know that he had his like upper tooth broken off. This is details that the enslaver would have given because he wanted like his enslaved person to be recaptured. And they are physical identifiers that would have been distinct or unique and would have helped the recapture of Prime. But for us, it's just another detail that otherwise we would have no way of knowing. So we can think about these things and say, oh, he had his tooth broken off, he was marked with smallpox, and that gives us details. And the thing again also about working with like histories that you don't necessarily know a lot about is that you're always left with more questions than answers, but that doesn't mean it's just still more to think about and consider. So we can sit here and wonder, okay, how would he have broken his tooth off? Like, did he attempt to escape previously to this, or was it just that he was out in the fields, tripped and broke his tooth? Like, we don't know, but it's just an interesting thing to be able to say that we know about this person. And then usually with runaway advertisements, we don't know what happens to this person unless there's another document. So in this case, there is. There's a manumission certificate from 1809. This is 7 years later. So we don't know anything about the circumstances in which Prime was recaptured, but this tells us that he was. And that 7 years later, so when he attempted to seek his freedom in 1802. He was 19. He was at some point recaptured, and then at the age of 25, he was officially manumitted by his enslaver. And again, we don't exactly know why. A lot of things went into like motivating an enslaver to manumit someone. Sometimes folks like enslavers would do this at the end of their lives. I don't know, out of perhaps the goodness out of their heart. I don't know how much you can really say that, but there's a lot of different incentives or things that might have inspired this. So this is just Prime's story. Again, I'm always just so happy when I can actually know someone's name. When you look at these documents, it can be like really disheartening to think about how many folks are just going unnamed without us knowing anything about them. But this is like a great example of also how we can use a bunch of archival documents, put them together to tell a greater story. And I always love to be able to know where that person lived as well. So this was Edmund Burroughs' house. Again, that stone structure was still there during the early 19th century. So yeah, we're gonna move on to the next one now, and we're transitioning into primarily looking at freedom seeking and through runaway advertisements now. And the first thing you'll probably notice is that this one, this picture on the left is not from, it's not like obviously an actual excerpt from a newspaper. This is from a book called Pretends to Be Free, which is a great resource that documents a bunch of different runaway advertisements that can be looked through, that have been like typed up nicely, so you don't have to like worry about misreading stuff. So for those interested, they can look at that after. But for my purposes, this runaway advertisement and the story of Bood is highly interesting, in that we have 4 known runaway attempts from him, that he attempted to secure his freedom 4 different times from 1756 through 1766. So, or 1759, I'm sorry, through 1766. And this is actually the second one to the left here, and it's noting the most significant thing here is, well, there's actually a lot that's really fascinating about these stories, but Bood, in this instance, this is his second runaway attempt, and it's telling us, specifically in that last paragraph as you read through, that he had previously, in his last runaway attempt, made it to Susquehanna Valley out in Pennsylvania, and had lived amongst indigenous tribes. At this time, there's like several different tribes out there, like Iroquois as well as Shawnee, but several different tribes at that time that were there, that he lived with for several months before he was somehow recaptured. Again, we don't know anything about the circumstances of his recapture on any of these runaway attempts, but it's still, we usually don't even know where these folks go. So to actually have an account that says where he went to is really significant. And it also kind of answers this question for many of us who may think, where do folks run to when they're escaping enslavement? Where do they go? So during this time, many of us are probably familiar with like the more stories of like plantation enslavement and stories from the South of like where folks used to run, where folks would go to seek freedom during that time. But when you think about 1759, there was nowhere to run north where there was no enslavement. So that people were forced to think outside of the box, honestly, and think where could they go to escape white colonization. So many folks had gone out at this time. When you go out to like far west Pennsylvania, it was not very strongly settled at that time by white colonists. So this was a place where both indigenous folks and Black folks could escape the realm of white colonization. And you'll also notice, interestingly, about the second runaway attempt by Bood, that he is running away with 3 other men. And this just, again, it like raises so many questions for me about how were they able to meet? How were they able to plan this? How did they communicate during this time? This is from you can see at the bottom there, it lists the enslavers. So at this time, Bood was enslaved by William Hunt, John Hart, and Joseph Calder. And this is from like the Hopewell area. Just to backtrack briefly, Bood was enslaved in Amwell, Hopewell, and Lawrenceville, which is this one on the right there. It was previously known as Maidenhead during this time. So during this, in 1759, when Bood sought freedom along with Jack and Tom and Bristol as well, it just makes us wonder what they were not living on the same property. How did they gather? There were also really stringent rules about the gathering of enslaved folks at this time. No more than 5 enslaved folks could gather together, and they had to be back by 9 p.m. They couldn't go anywhere without written permission. So it took like monumental strategizing to be able to meet in this time. So again, it just kind of raises those questions for us. And when you read this last paragraph, they also were able to bring guns with them. They had blankets. They planned this like very, very, very well. So it raises questions again about how were they able to do this? How much time did they take to strategize? How much time did they take to plan this? And it just also highlights Bood's and everyone else listed in this ad as well, their commitment to freedom and how much they were willing to sacrifice to gain their freedom. And then so this last runaway ad, which is listed from Wilson Hunt, interestingly, like terribly. So Bood was enslaved by 4 different folks at this time or throughout this period. So there was or 3 different folks: William Hunt, Wilson Hunt, and Thomas Hunt, and they're all like related. One of them are like 2 of the relations are cousins, and then uncle and son. So you can see that he was traded amongst his family, and that's just interesting to note because you can see in this last paragraph about Bood on like the right ad that he's noted as being cunning and really artful and evading capture. So things that would have happened to hit, like, for lack of a better words, he would have been known as a troublemaker, which he was. He was committed to seeking his freedom, and that was really annoying for the people that were committed to enslaving him. So what would have happened that he would have been traded around with this family to disorient him, so he would be isolated from the people that, in this case, that he had attempted to run away with, and also be able to just another like bleak reality of this is that if an enslaver wanted to sell a person that they were enslaving, they would have to disclose the information whether or not this person had attempted to run away. So you couldn't get as good of a price. As terrible as that reality is, and as hard as it is to speak about, like, that's something that was considered by these folks at this time. So instead, they would trade him around amongst their family so that they could disorient him without like losing money, as terrible as that is. But with this advertisement on the right, this is the last known freedom-seeking attempt by Bood that we have, or that I have found. And again, just a lot of details here that just really gave me pause. Again, the fact that he had smallpox, the fact that his toes had frozen off. I think about the fact that we all live in New Jersey here and experience winters, and I can't imagine what that would have been like to be outside, to be so committed to your freedom that you were willing to, Bood was willing to be outside, to lose his toes, that rather than be enslaved. And that's like an amazing, again, testament to his commitment to gaining his freedom. And again, I just really love this note about how cunning and artful he is, and how he just is, again, like this troublemaker, in that he's unwilling to be in the situation of enslavement any more than he has to. So over this period of 13 years, it's really remarkable to have 4 different freedom-seeking attempts. So like, we're gonna move on from this and go on to our next one. Okay, so now we are going to be talking about Cuffy, and the first detail that I wanted to start with here is that usually we have it's very hard to know where enslaved folks come from in Africa, because enslavers were not concerned with keeping track of that detail. It did not concern them, or really at all. It wasn't something they were thinking about. However, the name Cuffy has been like historically connected to the name Kofi, which is spelled Kofi, which is a name used among the Akan people who reside in present-day Ghana. So this is just like a really interesting fact to be able to know about this person already. Like I said, like when you're working, when you're working with people that you usually don't know that much about, any detail at all is like so amazing to know. But to know where these folks come from originally, where they come from in Africa, is like even more amazing. So this is my first note about Cuffy. And so far, we've looked at freedom seeking as a form of resistance, but there are a variety of different forms of resistance that enslaved folks used. You can like research more about that, and there were specific tactics used by gender, what women would do versus men, and how that played out. But there was always, so Cuffy, previous to 1767, had sought freedom, had run away 3 separate times from his enslaver, Daniel Hart, who lived in Hopewell. He was the brother of John Hart, the signer of the Declaration. So in 1767, it was on October 22nd, Cuff murdered his enslaver. He killed Daniel Hart. Like not immediately, but essentially he had attacked him with, it's like, again, centuries ago, so the details are not right there, but there are reports of a knife and reports of an axe that were used to kill Daniel Hart, and he died like later that day of complications. And then what happened was that Cuff ran away. From the details that are provided, it seems very apparent that this was not something that he planned to do. It was spur of the moment. Just by like the details that come out through this story, it wasn't something that he had set out to do. But instead, it was like he was pushed almost to this brink, and you can understand how someone who has consistently sought their freedom, consistently been brought back to their enslaver and forced into this position, would snap. And I think that many of us could recognize, could sympathize with that. So you can read through, again, this is an excerpt. So there's two excerpts here from newspapers of the time, the Philadelphia Gazette and then the Pennsylvania Chronicle. And you'll notice it's also just interesting to think about how slowly news traveled. We all have our phones now. We all like get news instantaneously, but just here you can see there was great fear about this. Obviously, this is like an enslaver's worst nightmare is to be killed by the person they were enslaving. So on October 22nd, this made it to the like Philadelphia like general news and was reported that this is again, so it happened on October 12th, but it was not made to the newspapers until October 29th, written on October 22nd. If you can follow those details. So this is again, and then it's not until October 28th, 6 days later, that the next notice is written, which says that Cuff is dead. And you can read through the second paragraph listed here from the Pennsylvania Chronicle, and then this was not published until November 2nd. And it's explaining that Cuff committed suicide. Reportedly committed suicide on just the day of or the night after. Again, the details are not set in stone on that. So he committed suicide, hung himself in the woods, and was found. His body was found the next day, and his the term that I would use is he was retroactively lynched, in that his body was then lit on fire and cut down to send a message to the rest of the town to show to enslaved folks what would happen if they killed their enslaver. So we'll go to the next slide just to see another interpretation or like version of this story. And this is from 1908, and I think that's just another more interesting like historical perspective. You can see this is an excerpt from the Old Pioneers of Hopewell, which was written by Ralph Eggy, like a Hopewell Borough. I don't know. He lived here. He was recording history from what he had access to the documents of a couple pioneer, or he calls them pioneers, but they were colonists and settlers. So he gives this really detailed account of what happened that day. And a couple of things to note is that, first of all, like there's no way he would have known a lot of these details. He did not. This is like over a century later. He did not have firsthand witnesses to this event, and he speaks with such authority. But I just want to like, put that out there that he didn't actually really know what happened. He has access to the documents of Joseph Titus, who was a neighbor to Daniel Hart. But again, that's not firsthand that he's experiencing this or knows much about it. He just has access to some of these documents. But you can see, if you can read it, I don't know if you can make it out, but he plays into a lot of racist stereotypes, which I don't know is that surprising, but is worth mentioning and highlighting. Like most definitely. He characterizes Cuff as a villain, as lazy. He plays into all of these stereotypes about Black folks of the like 20th century, I suppose, that he's referring to, and makes Daniel Hart out to be this hero, or like that he was wrongfully murdered. And I like has absolutely no sympathy for Cuff. Consistently feeds into the dehumanization of Cuff as well. And just it makes you wonder, like, even in the 20th century, this is like the perspective that folks of Hopewell had about Black people. So I wanted to highlight that before we got into like the actual details. And again, so he doesn't use any like citations, like no sources that he's doing like in-source citations at all, like to tell you where he's getting this information, but he provides like his perspective, I guess, or like his guess about what happened on this day. And he details that that Cuff was essentially like had enough one day and killed his enslaver, and then like just ran off and didn't bring anything with him, and then at a separate point had gone, he had and this is the figure that you're seeing all the way to your right is just like a potential route that Cuff may have taken. This is just my own imagination. I'm not saying that this is what actually happened, but I think it's an interesting way to try and visualize things based off of the geographical landmarks that were given in the text here. So he talks about Cuff making his way, and like the other sources also talk about this, making his way through Rosedale, like Mount Rose, and then ending up in a place called Honeybrook. And there's a Honeybrook Road, so that's like along the Honeybrook. Anyways, so that's just a potential place where Cuff may have chosen to commit suicide. So anyway, back to the excerpt from on your far left. He's talking about the potential that Cuff had gone to a neighboring farm that he stumbled upon and had claimed that there was a horse that had like lost its halter and he needed a rope, and asking this person for a rope so that he could, I don't know, get his horse back. And then he takes that rope to kill himself. And as much as when I first read about this, I wondered, like, was it actually that Cuff had committed suicide? Like, what would inspire him to do that? I think that's kind of like a question that maybe many of us would wonder. Why would he not like attempt to seek his freedom at this point? Why would he not like run away if he had already done that 3 times before? And again, I think that, and everyone's entitled to their own opinion about this, but from my perspective, it is that Cuff had not woken up that day and decided that he was going to kill his enslaver, but had been pushed to those circumstances, and then had decided, and very quickly after Cuff had killed Daniel Hart, essentially a mob of townspeople had formed to hunt him down. And it begs the question of, so we know that retroactively they lynch him, but can you imagine what would have happened if they found him alive? And what they would have done to him if he was found alive for killing his enslaver. So I think that almost in his final act of resistance, he chooses to control the way that he dies and to have agency over that. And I think that we can all kind of respect that. So he chooses to kill himself, and then he's not wrong, because when the townspeople find his body, they lynch it. They light him on fire. And again, you can see it in the last stanza of this thing in the middle here is an excerpt from Joseph Titus's diaries. Supposedly he wrote like this poem or like song about these events and recorded it. You can see in this last stanza, he's talking about using this as a warning to all other enslaved folks in the town. And I think something that like really stuck out to me was like, this is an insane story, and I had known nothing about it until I, stumbled upon these runaway advertisements. And the way that Ralph Egge talks about it, it's almost still like part of the local legend. There's also like references that the area known as like Cuffy's Hollow, where he committed suicide, is like known as haunted, and people are like told not to go there and things like that. And that's just like, I was surprised as a resident of Hopewell Borough, as someone who's been in this place my whole life, to have not known anything about that. But at the same time, like, I wasn't that surprised that I didn't know it. But it was still just a really like insane story. I don't know how else to characterize it other than that. And it was a remarkable act of resistance. And yeah, I guess I just want to like push back against this idea that Ralph Egge is pushing, that Cuff was the villain. I think that he was taking control and it was an act of resistance at the end of the day. So I wanted to end that on Cuffy's legacy on that note. And we are transitioning into like the census material. So we're going to be taking a bit of a turn from there. So this is just a graph of the number of Black residents living in Hopewell Valley from 1830 through 1950, just to help us kind of like visualize. You'll see that big jump happen in like the late 19th, early 20th century, reflecting the Great Migration, which we'll talk more about later, the effects of that. And the peak number of recorded Black residents in Hopewell Valley was in 1910, like 403 Black residents recorded in Hopewell. So from there, I just wanted to provide a bit of a generalized overview of the early census material. So similar to the tax ratables, there's not that many details given for anyone in these census records. So this is an example of, this is an excerpt from the 1830 census. And you can see that all that's given, and so the slants that are going towards the left are bleeding through from a different page, so it's just a note. It's the ones that are going towards the right that are actually on this page. So you can see that there's two Black women between the ages of 10 and 24. And as like interesting as these details are, the age ranges are so big that it's really hard to know like almost anything about these people, except when you look at them in conjunction with other documents like we did with the tax ratables and the manumissions and the runaway advertisements. So I just wanted to note that. And that's not different for white folks either. It's the same thing on the other side, except it doesn't have the distinction between freed and enslaved. So it's only like householders or like primary house residents. So like 95% of the time that's a man that's listed, and that's the only name that's on these documents. So in 1830, there were still 13 enslaved folks documented in Hopewell Valley. And there are 23 freed Black residents that are that own their own property, that are living independently from white folks. So that's what I wanted to know. And then by 1840, as I said previously, there were no recorded enslaved people living in Hopewell Valley, on these census documents at least. And by that time, there were 36 freed Black folks living independently. So that's 36 like Black landowners at that time. So from there, and then we'll see this big jump in the 1850 census is when we start to get a lot more information about people. You actually can now see the names of everyone living at a property. And this is listing two Black residents or two Black families in Hopewell, the Blackwells and then the Reasoners. So you can see that the names are listed as well as age, sex, race, and then professions as well, and how much their real estate is valued at, as well as place where they were born and like their marriage status, education status, and things like that. And all the way to the far right, you can see there's the notation. It was called deaf, dumb, blind, insane, etc. This is like a really outdated and offensive characterization that was used for people with disabilities. So I just wanted to highlight here, like what we were able to gain from actually seeing people's names written out, more like even greater than just actually being able to put names to these people. You can also learn more about the relationships between folks living in these places. So like that Samuel and Marguerite were married. These are like their children that are listed. And then you can also see all the way at the bottom there, listed as laborers. So it was pretty common practice for farmers, obviously that required a lot of labor to be able to bring in harvests and plant, etc. So these folks were, you can see this Benjamin Blackwell. He was a laborer on Samuel Blackwell's farm. It's pretty likely that this is a relative that was then was coming over to Samuel Blackwell's farm to help him either with the harvest or to help him just with the farming responsibilities. And then same thing with the Reasoner residents. Again, you can see more of a connection between like marriages as well as children, and just actually being able to know their names. You can track them throughout the census, like 1860, 1870, et cetera, which again just gives us a greater understanding of the family dynamics and being able to see them throughout the eras. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, again, going back to this idea of the Great Migration in Hopewell, I wanted to bring up the fact that while there was this big spike in the number of Black people living in the area, there was at this time a great presence, not a great presence, but a significant presence of the KKK in New Jersey. So this is an excerpt from a 1924 newspaper. So you can see the title, that there's this big convocation, it was called, that was planned in Hamilton, and it happened. Originally, the KKK wanted this to happen in Trenton, but Trenton at that time, the mayor was like this Irish man, and he understood how potentially dangerous it was to have the KKK come into Trenton, the city, which was really diverse. However, the KKK found a lot of, obviously, that's my dad, by the way. um, the K, yeah. So the KKK found a lot more sympathy in the rural areas of New Jersey, including Hamilton. So they were able to like get a permit to have this gathering in Hamilton in 1924 on Labor Day. And I did want to just first like go back and kind of note whatever. The differences between like this first era of the KKK and this second era. So in 1924, we'll start in the beginning first, actually. So the first era of the KKK is roughly defined from like the 1870s through the 1890s, where there's this huge surge in white supremacy, especially in the South, as a reaction to the end of the period of Reconstruction, when like Union troops or Northern troops finally left the South, essentially, and allowed white supremacy to once more reign over the South. And this was a period where the KKK was using violence to intimidate Black folks, newly freed Black folks, from using their new rights, being able to exercise their ability to vote, to get into offices, to just be free. So like the early period of the KKK is highly defined by this era of violence, lynching, burning down of houses. So I wanted to note that as distinct. The second era of the KKK, this great resurgence that we see in like the 1920s, the beginning of the 20th century, is still highly racist and like imbued with that racist ideology, but it's also a greater reaction to a lot of the changes that are happening in America at that time. Essentially, there's a lot of xenophobic, there's a really big xenophobic element to the KKK in the 1920s that's greatly just reactionary to the circumstances of that time, and that they're not liking the number of immigrants who are coming from Europe. They're not liking the differences between like German, Italian, Irish immigrants who are coming in. So as much as it is there's still a highly racist element to it, but it was also kind of a waspy reaction to want to try and return America to what they thought made it great. No, yeah. Where have we seen that before? So anyway, I just wanted to, this is a 1924 gathering on Labor Day, like I was saying. And this, what happened was it was, I think, like 10,000 people came to this. It was one of the largest gatherings of the KKK in New Jersey, in like the northern states at all. So that's highly significant. And this happened again in Hamilton, so not in Hopewell Valley, but also not very far from Hopewell Valley. And it's noted that during this rally, essentially the Klansmen were also like marching around, parading essentially, and in their cars went through like surrounding areas. And it was noted that in like these rural areas, their exact route is not known, but they had a lot of support. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that it's very highly likely that if they drove through parts of Hopewell Valley or made their way through here, there would have been likely a lot of support for them in a rural area that was kind of reacting to all of these new modernizing elements, as well as a new influx of Black residents. So from here, we're going to open up my census visualization. Sorry. The census is a really like detailed, filled document, but it can also be really dense and kind of hard to understand the trends that are happening. So what I've tried to do is go through go through the different census. And so in 1920, we start getting street addresses, which is awesome because now we can kind of map and understand where exactly folks were living. And this is where we can start to see like clusters of like knowing exact addresses to be able to plot them on a map. And this happened, I should note, just really in the boroughs, Pennington and Hopewell. Hopewell Township, they kind of would just be like, they live on a farm somewhere out there. So it's kind of not too helpful for us. And a lot of those structures are more newly constructed, whereas the boroughs are a lot more has been preserved. So if you, I guess I'll give them, yeah, we'll just make sure we get it up here. So I can walk us everyone through. Okay, yep, perfect. Okay, all good. So if we scroll down here, you can see this is a visualization of the census of 1920, 1930, 1940, and 1950. And you can zoom in here on, we can zoom in on Pennington Borough and see how folks were living, where clusters had formed of Black residents and families in this era. So from 1920 to 1930, you can see there's a huge cluster on South Main Street and then also on Crawley Avenue in Pennington Borough. And these are around different Black churches. So there's the Bethel AME Church in, yeah, so you can see Pennington Borough down there. And then, so there are clusters on South Main Street and Crawley Avenue. That's all that you really need to know at the moment. We'll get into more specific details. And then you can scroll over to Hopewell and see clusters here. The largest cluster is on Columbia Avenue, which is a really well-documented like Black community. Again, Elaine Buck and Bev Mills have done great work on that. You can read up on that later. And you can also see like where other folks are living. So when you see dots outside of the clusters of Columbia Ave, as well as South Main Street and Crawley Avenue, it's not always that this was, but there were a fair amount of Black residents who lived in the homes of white folks. Sometimes they were just boarding there, like they were just, whatever, paying rent and living there because they couldn't own their own home at that time. And then sometimes they were working in the homes of these white people. So we'll look at a couple different stories later of that. And then the last thing I wanted to draw your attention to, we'll just scroll down and get into this, is that you can see that cluster out in technically Lambertville now on 1750 River Road out in Lambertville now is still there. It was the Mercer County Workhouse that was founded in 1892 is when, 1892. And then you can click on this picture and see the old quarry that was there. And I wanted to get into that quick little exception clause in the 13th Amendment, which said that involuntary servitude was illegal except if someone was imprisoned. So what happens here, we see anywhere from 30 to 50 Black folks that are imprisoned here from like the 1930 census through the 1950 census. And you can see this is the quarry. So in the 1930 census, what is listed is all of the jobs and responsibilities that are given to the inmates at the Mercer County Workhouse. Many of them are working at the quarry as like stone crushers to help the process, or driving trucks back and forth with the loads of stones that have been crushed. And there are also people who previously, before they built the quarry in 1915, this was a farm, so they would force people to work the farm to have a harvest, to have a crop, and then force people to cook and clean. So this is just, I wanted to highlight a little exception to that 13th Amendment, in where people are forced to continue to work without being paid for it. And then you can scroll. It's on Bell Mountain, this correctional facility, it's now called, and they have been like trying to shut it down for a really long time for its terrible conditions, in that inmates are treated really badly. The food is disgusting. They are not given adequate medical care and different like just creature comforts that are not provided. So there have been consistent efforts to try and shut it down, but it's still in operation. Yes. So that's over on Bell Mountain. like I was saying, a place I think many of us have probably been. And then the second place that I wanted to highlight is a specific family that lived over on Crawley Avenue. This is the Witcher residence. So you can zoom in. This picture is from 1985, but this is one of the original houses built on Crawley Avenue in 1904. So we'll look later at the cluster of folks living on Crawley Ave, but they formed around the same time the First Baptist Church of Pennington was formed. So this is what the house looks like in 1985, and it still looks really similar today. So I thought that was just really cool to look at, and to look at the different people that lived there. We'll get into that later, but so it was a multi-generational home. In 1910, we see like the first generation of the Witchers that are living there. They are founding members of the First Baptist Church. They did a lot of work to help fundraise, and in 1910, it's Thomas and Susan Witcher, and we also see that they come from Virginia, which was during this period of the Great Migration, kind of harkening back to that. We see a significant number of Black folks are coming from Virginia and North Carolina. These are like the two big hubs of places we see people coming from to Hopewell Valley. And so when Thomas and Susan came in their early 20s, Thomas worked as a day laborer. He was working on different like farms, it seemed like. And then in 1910, presumably they took possession of this house again. Technically, like we don't have the exact street address until 1920, but it's pretty, I think we can make that assumption that they were living there. And then Susan Witcher continues to live there. She outlives her husband by like a while, essentially. And she works as a laundress, which I wanted to highlight is like a very important job that a lot of Black women took on during this period, as well as just like historically across the country. It was a way for Black women to bring in income while also maintaining agency and independence and living in their own home, which was a really big thing, especially for Southern washerwomen who had just been recently enslaved or recently freed from enslavement, I mean. And if you have time, you should definitely look into the Atlanta washerwoman strike of 1881, which was a great form of resistance. And again, where Black women were asserting their agency and freedom. So anyway, in 1930 onwards, we see that Susan Witcher is living with, at first, like lodgers, which was another way that she was able to bring in income. And then also, then she had her son and daughter-in-law working with her or living with her. And her son was working as a bellhop at the hotel. We don't know exactly which hotel. Perhaps it was the now Hopewell Inn, which was known back then as like the Central Inn, I believe. And then in 1950, Susan Witcher has passed away, and we see that the house is now inhabited by Albert and Stella Witcher, who are her son and her daughter-in-law. So that's just one of the stories of the residence. And again, I just really liked that we could see this is one of the original structures, again, on Crawley Avenue, and it's been really well preserved. So the next place that I wanted to look at was the Harris residence, and this picture is from, I believe, 1872. So this is located on South Main Street in Pennington. It was built originally as a wheelwright, so like somewhere where wheels would go to be fixed and built. But it was converted into residential housing in like the turn of the century, and we know that the Harris family lived there. So the elder Harris, sorry, I have to grab this now, that I have all my extra details written down. So the Harris residence, and we know that in 1920 it was Edward Harris who was like the patriarch of this family. He was widowed, but he was living there with his daughter Sadie and his grandson John Harris, and one boarder who was named Jeremiah Wilson. And at this time, we see that he worked in masonry. Again, this is another man who had come from Virginia and came to Pennington to live there, and owned this house. You can see a picture of what it looks like now when you scroll to the next one. It's a really beautiful house, and you can see kind of how it's been maintained. And again, this is part of like that South Main Street cluster, so it's closer to the Bethel AME Church of Pennington. So again, you can see this clustering around community hubs and places where communities could gather, such as the churches. And so Ed Harris passed away, and in 1930 we see that Sadie Harris, who had like in this time gotten married, moved further down Main Street. She lived at 227 South Main Street, for those who know, and lived there from 1950 through from 1930 through 1950, and lived there with her son, who she was working as a servant and she was working out of house, but was able to have her own independent residence at that time, which is, again, important to note. So again, I just liked when I could find a photo of what these houses would have looked like in the era or closer to the era and how they look now. I think that's really a really great way to look at these things. And again, be able to visualize and bring the census to life. And we can scroll down to the next one. And this is our first house that we're looking at in Hopewell Borough. And this is an example of where a Black person is living in the home of a white person or white family, essentially, at this point. So Anna Ridley and Annie Hoagland, both Anna Ridley in 1920 and Annie Hoagland in 1930, both lived at what's now like 8 Llewellyn Street in Hopewell Borough, right by the Presbyterian Church, in the house of Louis Labaugh, who was like this older white man. He was living there alone with he was living there with his wife and his wife's father as well. So the Anna Ridley and Annie Hoagland are listed as servants in this household. So they're, most likely doing like the everyday chores, laundry, as well as cooking and things like that, just to consider like what they are, what their lives were like. And you can look at this, and if you're from Hopewell Borough and you're like, I don't know where this house is at all, it doesn't look like this anymore, it's because that turret and the gazebo were removed in 1960, and you can tab and see what the house looks like now, and maybe then it'll be a little more familiar. So something else interesting to note is that Anna Ridley, after Louis Labaugh died between the 1930 and 1940 census, she continued to live with Mary Labaugh, who was Louis's wife, and they lived on 87 West Broad. So she continued to work as a servant, as a maid, in the house of this woman. So again, that just kind of highlights, I don't know, maybe the potential relationship that she had fostered with them. She herself was widowed and didn't necessarily have another place to live. She had a son, but perhaps he couldn't support her, and perhaps she couldn't afford to live somewhere else. So it's just interesting to consider the circumstances that go into where people live and just how they live. So, and again, to note that this is like one of the places where Black residents were living outside of the cluster in Hopewell Borough, which was really on Columbia Avenue. So we'll scroll down to the last residence we're looking at today is the Arnold residence. And I thought this story was really fascinating. So this house, this is not a historic picture. This is from like, I think 2007 or something. Maybe we can consider that historic now. I don't know. So this is 27 West Broad, literally right around the corner here. And there are many great things about this story and the story of the Arnold family. They lived there all the way from probably before 1920, but again, we can't for sure say because we don't have street addresses, but likely at least from 1910 all the way through 1950. And these are, again, folks that, so it was Kate Arnold and Paul Arnold were like the original family members, and they both came from Virginia, or Kate came from Virginia. Not Paul. He was from New Jersey. So they owned this home and lived there all the way through 1920 to 1950. It's only in 1910 that we see Paul that's living there because he dies at some point between those two census documents. So in 1920, Kate was working as a cook, and it's documented that she works out of the house, so she's going somewhere. Again, this is like another way where Black women were able to maintain their agency, but also bring in money to support their family. We see that she's living there in 1920 with her daughter, Elena, her son, Arthur, and her other son, Paul, who was at that point too young to be working, but her son, Arthur, was working as a laborer at the steam quarry. Again, that doesn't tell us which exact quarry he was working at. If you heard Asher talking earlier about the quarry talks that are coming up, you can go there and learn more specifics about that. But there were 4 or 5 operating quarries in this area at the time, so he very well might have worked at one of those. And then we see in 1930 that, again, Kate is still living there. She's like well into her like 60s, 70s at this point. But that her daughter has at this point become a nurse. She's working as a nurse. And then her other son, Theodore, comes home and he's a veteran of World War I, and he is working as a chauffeur in town, which again, I think is a really interesting note just about how these big historical events filter down and come back to us at the local level. And something else that I wanted to note was that the malleability of race at this time, and just honing on the fact that race is a social construct at the end of the day. From the 1920 census through 1950, the Arnold family are listed as mixed race, as Black, and as white, even at one point. So again, that just kind of like drives in the fact that throughout these different times, these different people had completely different characterizations of what this family was, what their racial identity was. And we can tab to, or you can like, if you scroll to the next photo here and click on it, this is Paul Arnold, and he actually was a professional baseball player, which I thought was really, really cool. He was an outfielder. He played on several different teams on like he was playing at the highest level that he was able to as a Black man. So he was playing on professional teams there in Newark. He started local and then obviously got to the higher levels, played in Newark as well as several teams in New York as well, which I think is a really interesting thing. So he played professionally through 1936. Back then they didn't have those like almost billions of dollars that you could make off of baseball. So he had to come back. He came back and worked as a chauffeur. He was later recorded as working there. And after Kate Arnold died, the house stayed in possession because it was owned by the family. It passed to the eldest daughter, Elena, who lived there. She started working as a hairdresser. She was like a beautician hairdresser, I suppose, and worked as that independently. So she lived there through 1950. And again, that's the last data we have. But again, her brothers lived with her throughout the rest of the 1950s as well, 1940 and 1950. I'm sure like making her do all this housework because that's how it goes as the only sister, isn't it? So if you scroll down, you can see, I just again kind of wanted to juxtapose the different, the 2 houses on, or 114 Crawley Ave, which is where the Witchers lived. I just thought it was so cool that like they look still so similar. The like integrity of the house has been so well preserved. You can kind of like slide back and forth and see that. Again, that's a picture from 1985 versus like the Google Maps photo from 2025. And I've also included just an excerpt from the 1930 census about the Witchers as well. So you kind of get like a better image of, or just kind of reminding you of like what was provided information wise at this point. You can see again, she's working as a laundress. She's living there with her son, her daughter-in-law. And if you can scroll, you can like zoom in on the side and be able to see that her son Albert's working as a bellhop at a hotel, and then her daughter-in-law is working as a servant. And then there's this visualization. Ooh, there's an issue. Sorry. So you guys can see here, I just have to reload it. If you play restart that, you can see how the formation on Crawley Avenue kind of grew and blossomed a bit. So as I was saying earlier, the First Baptist Church was technically established in 1902. However, the structure wasn't built until 1904. And it's also that same time that these houses are starting to be built on Crawley Avenue, which is actually named for the first reverend of the First Baptist Church, Edward Crawley. And a lot of the folks that were living on Crawley Avenue were, again, like those founding members of the church. So just highlighting how folks were living and like kind of what drew people together community-wise. It's very interesting to see that and see how it grew. But that is the last thing that I have for to show you today. Now we're just gonna open it up for questions. We can wait. Sorry, I'm just getting it back to normal over on this side. Present. Oh my gosh. Oops. Okay. Sorry. So thank you. Thank you so much. And if anyone has questions, I think we have questions maybe from Zoom too. Feel free to, I don't know, raise hands, I guess we'll go with. Yeah. Yeah. Hi.
Expand a little bit on the ammunition and what response the owner to file it again, what their expectation is by doing so.
Yeah, sure.
State law, federal.
So like the specific stuff is like it's not the state level, like the exact requirements or whatever. And so an enslaver would have to go to their county level justice of the peace and then like overseer of the poor, they're called, to have the enslaved person examined to ensure that they would not be like a drain on resources and not would be able to like support themselves to some level. What exactly like goes into sparking an enslaver to manumit someone is again like kind of like it's hard to say generally what would motivate that. Again, like growing sentiments of abolition at this time. We see like again going back to the example of Prime, who's manumitted in 1809. This is 5 years after the Gradual Emancipation Act is established in New Jersey. So perhaps he was inspired by that. He was getting towards the end of his life as well. So you see some enslavers at that time would manumit folks. Does that, yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
Maybe I missed it, but when the John Mark's brother was killed and he was hung, did a constable or some law enforcement person make the determination that it was a suicide?
No, not really. So thanks for that question. But essentially it was just I don't know that a constable was consulted at all that this was a suicide. It's just kind of that's how it's been recorded to local legend and that he killed himself. So some people and also with the different notices that he had gone to seek out a rope as well. People made the assumption from that he had killed himself. Additionally, like if it had been a murder, the townspeople would have taken credit for that. That wouldn't have been something that they would have hidden, and he would have been most likely murdered in a much more brutal way. Any other questions?
Where do you find a manumission record?
Manumission records are available on the New Jersey State Archives. You can essentially go, if you honestly like Google NJ manumission records, it'll come up on Google probably almost immediately, or you can like navigate through the state archive site. And you can then like Control F and say like Hopewell or Pennington, or not Pennington, not really, but Hopewell and Hopewell Valley or Hopewell Township will come up and you'll see a bunch of records there. I guess for this presentation, I just wanted to be able to showcase like a lot of the different records and types of archival information that I'd used. So I chose to tell stories about folks who I had the most information about. So when I knew that I had not just manumission records, not just runaway advertisements, or not just like one thing, and be able to tell like a more comprehensive story about someone, because it's so like it's so frustrating and unsatisfying when you only know so little about someone, and I didn't want to make you guys all sit through that. Yeah.
The graph of the census.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. I don't have any necessarily information about like why specifically there was a dip, but honestly, in 1850, Hopewell was like somewhat struggling. Again, this is kind of before a lot of the railroads had come, a lot of those quarries had opened. So, and Hopewell was kind of in competition with other towns like Griggstown, in producing and being able to transport, goods. So it was it was a tough time for all people in Hopewell. And you can imagine that that would have been a bit of a push factor at that time. Any other questions? Okay.
I of course can't resist. I promise this is not a planning question.
Mhm.
Do you know, like, the enslavers that
Mhm.
you cited in the first part of your presentation? Do we know where their homes were and where those slaves may have lived? And has there been any discussion locally about trying to erect markers there to give some, respect to the people who had enslaved there?
I think you might have just given maybe an idea to some folks. The Witness Stone project has been going on. I think, is it 2021? I'm sorry, I was graduated by that point. I'm a little out of the loop. 4 years? Yeah. So that has been started. There's a witness stone over at the Old School Baptist Church to highlight Friday True Heart. But it's hard to say exactly, especially the folks that were living in what's like the township. Like the farms and those lines are a little more hard to pin down. So there's a great effort within like the Hopewell Valley Historical Society, people who like specifically focus on that, and are trying to, I guess, like tie that together more, but that's not something that I decided to get into, specifically.
Presentation is part of your capstone, and when will you complete that?
Great question. So my like capstone project is, at Rutgers, they have an option to do like an experimental things, which is more, I've been building like a public history project. So a lot of this like, census visualization and the database that I created are things that I want to have published out to, make available to everyone here and just like generally on the web. So that's something that'll be completed. My due date is May 7th. So check in with me then as to what the status is. Hopefully it'll be available. Yeah. Any other questions? No?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to the Historical Society, to Sam, to the Hopewell Public Library with helping with planning this event, coordinating it, making it happen. Doug Dixon, Bob, you've just been so helpful and making sure everything's been running smoothly here tonight. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming out as well.